I hope everybody had a chance to enjoy their lunch or are enjoying. You're welcome to enjoy your lunch in here still. But we are going to go ahead and start our lunch session with Stephen Brozovich. He's the HR Evangelist with AWS. Let me take a few minutes to introduce Stephen. He is the Principal Evangelist for the AWS People Experience team. For 13 years, Stephen has held technical roles that allowed him to observe the organizational patterns that accompanied Amazon's growth and technical evolution. Stephen became Principal Evangelist for AWS Human Resources in 2019. His mission is to help AWS customers unlock innovation and invention. Please give a warm welcome to Stephen.
Well, thank you very much. It really is a privilege and an honor to spend time with you today. I started my journey at Amazon almost 23 years ago. It was August of 1999, and the world looked a little different back then. Amazon as a company looked a little different back then. When I joined Amazon, we were in 4 countries. We started out in the US. We expanded out from there into UK, Germany, and Japan. We had 4 product categories on our retail website. We started out, as most people know, selling books. We expanded from there into music. Our 3rd product category, believe it or not, an entire line of business for us was VHS. I realize now at the age that I'm at, as I'm giving this presentation to younger and younger folks, I'm going to have to stop and explain to them that we used to actually have magnetic tape inside of a big plastic cartridge you'd have to shove into this weird machine and hope somebody else had rewound it before you could start watching. Think about how much transformation there has been in the world since the development of this little device. At Amazon, we've had a tremendous amount of change. And one of the questions we often get is, how in the world did we go from building, a bookstore and selling books and music and, yes, VHS tapes, to the wealth of products, the really wide breadth of things that we have developed over the years? We're going to spend some time digging into aspects of Amazon's culture that we believe have actually been the key element of our longevity as an organization. And I'm going to put some caveats around that. And the first thing I'm going to say is, I'm going to describe our culture, and I'm not going to presume that our culture is the right culture. So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you this is how you should be doing things. But as we've worked with organizations across every industry segment, whether that be in the private sector or the public sector, we see common patterns of how humans tend to work well together, solving problems. And so we're going to share some of the approaches that we've taken as a company that we think have helped us in our journey to where we find ourselves today. Now, all of you are here in this room because of, well, lots of the challenges that you face. And this whole move to the cloud and this whole AWS didn't even exist as a thought when we first started out as a company. So how in the world do we get to where we are today? One of the key factors that drives us, the common unifying factor in all of this, is our company's mission. So Amazon's mission is to be Earth's most customer-centric company. Now, there's a couple of things I find really inspiring about that mission. And the first is, it's big. Now, I've had some people argue with me. And they've said, Stephen, why the Earth? Why not the universe? And I just have to say, hold on. Right now, the only customers we're aware of happen to be humans. Most of those live on this planet, so let's say Earth for now. But the second thing that I find really inspiring about this mission is it invites us to ask the question, how do we make life better for the customer? And we don't have any restrictions around how we choose to respond to that question. Now, I would say if you want to get more in-depth view into our culture than what we're going to get into today, I would highly recommend reading our annual letters to shareholders. In addition to the financial information that we publish every year as a publicly traded company in the US, we always take the opportunity to author a short essay that describes a key characteristic of who we are and how we think about the world. Several years ago, Jeff Bezos used that letter to describe Amazon as one of the best places to come to fail. Why would I want to go anywhere to fail? That doesn't sound like fun. And yet our perspective is this. If you want to invent, you have to experiment. And if you already know the outcome of an experiment before you conduct it, it's not exactly an experiment. So while we do think it's important to ask the question, how do we prevent failure from happening? We actually think it's a more powerful question to ask, how do we embrace failure as a necessary component of invention and innovation? And we'll share some of the approaches we take to that. Now, another one of Jeff's shareholder letters focused on this phrase. Now, our very first shareholder letter used this phrase. We said, it's day one for the internet. And we said at that point in time, we think it's also day one for us as a company. So in his 2018 letter to shareholders, Jeff Bezos really focused in on what do we mean when we talk about the term day one. Now, like most corporate cultures or organizational cultures, you start to have acronyms, you start to have internal jargon and words and phrases that only mean something to you and to no one else. And so I want to just unpack what it is that we're talking about. We're striving to be a day one company. What do we mean by that? So I'm going to draw a contrast between what we would call day one culture and day two culture. So one of the first differentiators between a day one culture. Day one, I'm thinking about an organization that is just starting out. There tends to be a lot of clarity around the mission, what it is that we are trying to accomplish. Why did we decide to get this group of humans together to do something in the first place? We tend to be really clear on what it is we're trying to drive on behalf of customers or constituents. But as the organization matures, as we spend a little bit more time, we get a little bit more complex. What tends to happen over time, we started out with a lot of focus on our mission, but over time, we start to focus even more and more about our own stuff. How are we relating to each other? How is the process? What's the internal process look like? Now, that's not a bad thing to do. We'll get into a little bit more about that as we go through. But it does potentially slow down what we're trying to accomplish, and then we're investing energy in things that actually maybe don't matter to our customers or our constituents. Another thing that's kind of a contrast between day one and day two. In day one, we don't have a lot of established well practices, right? Because we're figuring stuff out as we go. And so if there's a change, we're able to pivot really quickly to meet that change because we don't have a lot of kind of institutionalized behavior that kind of forces us down certain tracks. As organizations mature, the tendency is to still be able to change, but it takes a lot more effort. You have to be really deliberate about a shift in strategy or direction. In day one, we don't know what's going to work because we haven't solved any of these problems yet. We're still trying to figure this stuff out. So as a result, we tend to be much more experimental. We just want to see what's going to work. However, as the organization matures and we become much more comfortable, we've already figured out these 5 things work, and this is how they work well. But then as a result, we start to actually become risk averse because we know this one works. We're not so sure about this other approach. And then the last kind of contrast I'll draw between day one and day two. Day one, organizations are typically disruptive by nature. You're doing something new, you're injecting yourself into a problem space that hasn't been addressed before, or you're completely changing the approach that was being taken before. But as the organization has grown and matured and we've figured out those patterns that really tend to work well, rather than being disruptive, we start to become protective. Right? In the corporate sector, that often starts to be, well, this action results in revenue, therefore don't touch that one. And by nature, day one companies are always going to be willing to disrupt what they're doing because they assume there's probably a better way to do it than we're doing it currently. So here's some contrasts, day 1 and day 2. Now, we're not saying it's bad. Like day 2 doesn't mean bad. It just means that we're not able to move as quickly as we would like to address the challenges that face us. Or we've become so internally focused that we're no longer delivering the results we actually started out to go do. So what are some of the warning signs? What are the things that we can kind of start to pay attention to say, if we want to really force ourselves to stay as day 1 as possible, what should we pay attention to? One of those warning signs is we tend to start becoming more and more focused on our own internal process. Now, that's not a bad thing. So in my early years at Amazon, one of the roles I had in my tech space was I was a technical program manager. And if you're a TPM, your job is to stitch together systems, to create standardized process around things, to get predictable outcomes. It's all about process and coordination. But that's not day 2 behavior so long as all of that process and coordination is actually enabling the right kind of customer outcomes. And so we have to maybe put up our antennae when we start to see, hey, this looks more like we're solving some kind of internal efficiency issue, and it actually has zero impact on the customer. It can feel like hard work, and we're busy doing it, but maybe it's not actually leading towards the kind of customer outcomes we're looking for. Another danger. Another kind of gravitational pull pulling us towards day 2. And this is, I think, a special paradox for us at Amazon. We love data. We love using data to drive decisions. But there's an interesting paradox here, because it's always easier to measure something near term. It's always easy to be precise on what we're measuring when we're talking about a shorter term objective. It's a lot harder for us to actually measure something like customer delight. And because we might be a performance-based culture, or we're accountable for the budget, or whatever it might be, there's inspection of our data. Our tendency is to start to solve for the numbers and not really necessarily addressing the right long-term customer problem. And then a third warning sign we look at. It's natural, as an organization grows, it's natural to insert layers so that you can actually manage the organizational growth. That's not a bad thing to do. But as a small team starts to become a bigger and bigger team, there's again some patterns we start to see happen. And one of those is that we actually get further and further away from the people who are actually interacting with the customer or the constituent. I'm making decisions as a high-level leader, and I'm supposed to look at the strategy, but it's harder for me to see what's happening down at the surface. And then also as a result, because maybe we now have a lot of people using our platform and people using our systems, we actually try to make sure that the right people, quote unquote, are making the decisions. And so we tend to then consolidate decision-making within those upper levels so that they have the right visibility or right judgment to drive decisions. But as a result, that constrains our ability to experiment. It constrains our ability to try new things. So if this is the world we live in, and I'm certainly, as I'm saying these words, I can think of scenario after scenario. Amazon is not immune from this pressure to shift toward a day 2 mentality. The question is, how then do we counteract that? What are the things that we can do to enable decision-making within the organization? So in that shareholder letter, Jeff uses the specific concept of decision-making to really draw the contrast. When I think, and I've spent a lot of the last 10 years really focused on culture at Amazon, culture within customer organizations, really trying to understand. And I think one of the best ways to really understand the workings of a culture is to look at how decisions are made. Who gets to make the call and why? And so the more we can unpack that and really understand, does this really line up with who we want to be? Does our decision-making process reflect the organization we're trying to become? In this shareholder letter, Jeff again talks about it's not that day 2 organizations make bad decisions. In fact, there's often a lot of precision around the decision that wouldn't be able to be possible in a day 1 organization. It's that they tend to make those decisions slowly. And that actually can be a really big problem. Because if you have a constituent or a customer who is frustrated, the longer it takes to get to the decision, the more wrong the answer becomes. So how do we maintain that velocity? Now, if I were to draw a picture of what Jeff's ideal looks like, it would look something like this. Everyone in the organization is moving as quickly as they can, solving problems for customers, doing the right thing. Now, you know, reality actually often looks a little bit more like this. We got a lot of people working really hard, but we're headed in all kinds of different directions. Now, this happens. It's a challenge that happens with every single human organization. And it becomes even more apparent when those organizations go through growth. So there are ways to control this, right? We have to make some kind of sense out of the chaos. Now, one normal tendency is I might actually start with a team that's going in the right way, but what we do is we actually say we want to make sure we're making the right decision. So let's actually inject some kind of policy or some kind of approval layer to ensure that we are making the right decisions. And actually, it is effective at making sure that the decisions we make are the right ones. But you can see how constrained our velocity now has become. Because our velocity has been constrained now to the throughput of that decision-making policy or that individual. And you can see how much wasted energy there is in the system. And if that wasted energy is people, these are people who are trying to do the right thing that are now frustrated because they can't. I can think of no more unsatisfying place to be than to know the right thing to do and have to wait to get approval to do it. I know I'm hitting some sore spots, and this is true. This happens for us as well, so we're not immune from this. So then the question is, if this isn't a really workable approach to drive better decision-making as the organization, what is? Well, we think if we can use the right set of mental models, if everyone in the organization is thinking about the problem space, about the constituent, the customer in the right way, if we're all leaning on the same qualities of things to make our decisions, those mental models actually help us drive consistent results. So if I can get those mental models right. Now, there's a problem with this picture, because this picture actually assumes that I can already articulate the mental models, and then I can get everyone on my team to actually adopt them. I think a more accurate picture looks something like this. It's messy. It's when we interact with each other to figure out the right mental models to govern what we're going to do. When we wrestle with it. Now, I've been at Amazon a long time. There's lots of things that I really love about our culture. My favorite thing, I will tell you, is this 5-word phrase. Unless you know better ones. We share our mental models, but our premise from the very beginning is none of us has complete truth. None of us knows all the answers. And so we invite debate. We invite argument. Why? Because someone else's perspective could be the one thing that gets us to the better answer than what we walked in the room with. So we've spent a lot of time trying to write down and distill some mental models that work for us as an organization, that really act as the guardrails around decision making. And so I'm going to share a couple of them with you. These are our leadership principles. There's a URL there. You can look this up, and these are all available. I'm not going to walk through. There's 16 of them, so I'm not going to walk through all of them. But I want to give you a taste of what it means to codify these mental models, of writing them down, and how they can then impact the behavior of every person in the organization. So let's take a look first at our first leadership principle, customer obsession. Leaders start with the customer, they work backwards, they work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over customers. Now, we spent a lot of time trying to get really clear on the language, and right away, the first 2 words are ones that might make you stop and go, huh? Obsession. Like, it's not normally a healthy thing to be described as being obsessed. And yet, for us, that is how often we want customer to intrude in our thinking. I'm in the middle of some random decision that I'm trying to make, and somebody's going to say, but what about the customer? That's actually one of the most powerful clarifying questions we can ask ourselves. There's a lot of decisions we might make as an organization that would increase revenue, or that might make shareholders happy with us because we're a publicly traded company. Or there's things that we might do because we're just a bunch of builders and we love building things. And we say no when we can't connect that activity to a value to the customer. So it's an incredibly powerful clarifier for us. But we're going to walk through. There's a couple of these. I just want to walk through kind of line by line how this works for us. We start with the customer. Now, many organizations begin by looking at their capabilities. And based off of their capabilities, they decide what they can go build. And then they go look for customers that might want the thing that they built. And that's an approach that works for a lot of organizations. At Amazon, we've chosen to do it the other way around. We're going to start with a clear definition of the customer. And we may actually not know how to go solve their need yet. But the more clarity we have on who that customer is, the more likely we are to build a solution that actually satisfies someone's needs. And so one of the most powerful questions for us is, who is my customer? Now, it seems like a fairly straightforward question, right? But let me give you a concrete example about how this impacts the work that we do. So I came to Amazon Web Services proper about 6 years ago to run talent management. So my team owned promotions, performance management, talent reviews, all of that people side of the stuff. And I had been running the team for about 9 months. And someone on my team said, hey, Stephen, we should do an offsite and like get our team together and actually do some planning and long-range thing. And I'm like, yes, of course we should. Bad manager, I didn't think about that myself. We should go do that, absolutely. So we do an offsite. And we get everybody together. And by the way, it's me and 4 other people. So this isn't a very large team. And one of the exercises we did is I said, okay, I want us to sit down and I want us to articulate our customers. Who are our customers? And so I had everybody write their own list. And if I'm running a talent management organization, you might say my customer is our senior leadership. It's the individual contributor. It's the manager. Like there's lots of different images I could have in my mind of who my customer is. So I had the team write down, who are our customers? And then I said, okay, now I want you to stack rank them. Okay, 1 through 5 or 1 through 9, whatever. By the way, you can't have 2 number ones. It doesn't work. Practically speaking, you can't actually prioritize for 2 people at the same time. So I had everyone number their list, and then we compared notes. And this team of 5 people, myself included, who had been working together for 9 months, not one of us had the same number 1 customer listed. All of a sudden, I got this insight of like, oh, no wonder there's been so much internal conflict on my team. Everybody's trying to be customer obsessed about a different customer. So starting with this really important question, who is my customer? The clearer I can get on that question, the more likely it is that what I build is actually going to go solve one of their real felt needs. So the first question we ask is, who is my customer? And the second question I need to ask is, how am I making life better for them? That's the barometer. If we claim to be Earth's most customer-centric company, we should be able to see the impact of what we do in actually making life better for the customer. So as I think about customer obsession, we start with the customer, and then we say we work backwards. We're not starting with what we know how to do. We're starting with a clear understanding of the customer problem, and then we go figure it out. I'll show some examples in here of kind of the approach that has led to that. But part of what this does is it actually frees us up to invent and experiment. If we all agree on the destination and we have no idea which approach is going to work to get there, I've heard this being described as be stubborn on your vision and flexible on the implementation. And this frees us up to move in all kinds of directions we would have never anticipated. But the clarity of our destination, we all agree on it, that's the direction we're going to go. The second line of our customer obsession leadership principle talks about trust. Now, Amazon's a big company now. We have a lot of amazing products and services and technology. Our lifeblood is customer trust. It is the most important asset that we have. And so as we experiment, we have to make sure that we are safeguarding that trust that customers place in us. And then the last sentence we say is, we need to be aware of what our competitors do, but that can never be the reason why we do anything. It always has to be grounded on the impact to the customer. If I'm taking a leadership principle like customer obsession, and I'm trying to make sure everyone in my organization is thinking along those same lines, you can see how this is going to start to shape behavior. By being clear on that mental model, then we're going to have some flexibility about what we do, but we're kind of all operating under the same rules. I'll share one more leadership principle with you, just to get you thinking about these mental models and their impact. Our second leadership principle is ownership. Leaders are owners. They think long-term. They don't sacrifice long-term value for short-term results. They act on behalf of the entire company beyond just their own team. They never say, that's not my job. So first sentence, we say leaders are owners. By the way, I need to make something clear. When we say leader, we actually mean everyone at Amazon. This is not just for people in a formal position of authority. And this is just the reality of human nature. Now, we are still a rapidly growing company, so even if I hire somebody to be an individual today, I may need them to lead a team tomorrow. So we want to make sure that we're hiring people that have the capability to lead others. And the truth is, whether we are in a formal position of authority or not, we have the ability to influence and impact the people around us. Like, that's one of the simple definitions of leadership, is influencing others toward a common goal. So we want every individual at the company to be thinking about themselves as a leader. And we say leaders are owners. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, there's two things that we want to do. Well, one, we believe in this enough that our people are actually literally owners in the company. We have chosen a compensation philosophy that places an inordinate amount of our compensation on stock, which is a long-term personal investment in the company as a whole. So literally, we want people to be owners. But then figuratively, the way they think and behave, we want them to think like they own the company. And if you own something, you behave differently toward it. So I would ask this question: how many of you have ever gotten an oil change for a rental car? You never would, because it's not your car, it's not your problem. But if you own a car and you don't get the oil changed on it, you're going to have to live with the consequences. It changes our mentality about the things that we are doing. It's not just checking off a task list, it's I own the results of this and the impact of my decision. And one of the things that changes is my time horizon. Because if I own something, I'm going to actually consider the fact that I'm going to have to live with the decision of what I've made longer term. Now, there's some other behaviors. By the way, this almost works against human nature. As humans, we have a much easier time optimizing for what's happening next in the day, and a lot harder time thinking about what's going to happen 3 years from now. So by clarifying this mental model, we're saying when I interact with anyone on my team, everybody should be operating under the assumption that we're not going to sub-optimize for the near term, that we're thinking longer term. We also say leaders act on behalf of the entire company beyond just their own team. Again, not typical human behavior. Humans are tribal and territorial by nature. How quickly, even within a growing company, do we find ourselves in scenarios where all of a sudden us has become us and them? And we're saying, no, no, no. In our organization, it's just us. That means we have to work through things we would otherwise not want to work through. That means we need to think beyond the boundaries of whether this benefits me and my team locally and what is going to be the impact on the other teams and the company as a whole. And then the last thing that this leadership principle tells us is leaders never say, that's not my job. Again, not a normal human activity, right? If I were to, let's envision a scenario, right? I'm an owner of a small convenience store, okay? My staff has gone home for the evening. I'm in the back. I've been doing the books, and I'm ready to close up for the night. I walk towards the front, and I realize somebody knocked over a beverage, and it's all over the floor. What am I going to do? Well, I do have janitorial staff that should probably come and clean this up during normal operating hours, but they're all home and in bed. If I'm the owner, I'm probably going to go to the closet and I'm going to get out the mop and the broom and I'm going to clean that thing up before I go home to bed. I don't know who made the mess, but that's not the point. The point is not who made it, it's what am I going to do as an owner to make sure the mess actually gets taken care of. Now there's a flip side to this, because I could use this and I could say, well, then everybody has to do everything. And how do we have a proper division of labor? So I will say, as an example, I'm a homeowner. I mean, actually the bank owns most of my home. I probably own the front door by now. But as a homeowner, there's a lot of things that I'm going to just take care of, right? Because I don't have a landlord that I can call to get them to take care of. Oh, the shelf fell down. I need, maintenance to come fix that. But if there's a problem with my gas line, I'm not fixing that problem, but I am going to make sure that it gets done. So this mentality, now you can start to see by trying to be really clear with the culture we are trying to create, by articulating it and writing it down, it makes it so that the people operating in that culture are all operating under somewhat of the same guidelines, and then we can all be moving together, understanding. I'm going to walk into a room where there's a group of people with yellow shirts. We don't always wear yellow shirts, but today all of our AWS folks are in yellow. And I know whether I have interacted with them or not prior to this moment, that we're all going to be holding ourselves to the same set of standards in the decisions that we make. I'm going to pivot a little bit because I want to share how this stuff actually shows up in real life, in particular, how we think about invention and innovation. And so I'm going to focus on the last sentence of Invent and Simplify. As we do new things, we accept that we may be misunderstood for long periods of time. I'm sure you've experienced this as well. You have a bright new idea. You have something you want to go get done. And people are going to come up with all kinds of very logical, well thought out reasons why you shouldn't do it. So we understand that about invention and innovation. Now sometimes that pressure that says, why are we doing this, comes externally. Sometimes it comes from within our own organization. And I'll have to say, I've been one of those people. I was at Amazon when we launched the Kindle, our ebook reader. And I thought, what in the world are we doing? Why are we doing this? First, we were not a devices business at the time. We had never built a piece of consumer hardware in our company's history, so why would we try? Second, we were not first to market. Sony had an e-reader out before we did, and it had been a commercial failure. So why in the world would I go down that path? Third, what was our primary source of revenue at the time as a company? Books, physical books. Why would I build a device whose sole purpose is to eliminate the need for my primary source of revenue? Doesn't make any sense until we ask this question: who is my customer? Okay, in this world, in this scenario, we're, as a business, like our favorite customers were those people who bought a lot of books. And then we say, okay, if that's our customer, what is an enduring truth about that customer? What can we depend on them wanting or needing 5 and 10 years from now? And if you're an avid reader, I can already tell you, I know what you're going to want 5 or 10 years from now. What is that? You're going to want more books. You're going to want more to read. We can't imagine a universe where that's not going to be true. So that's kind of an enduring truth. Let's identify the enduring truth. And now we would ask this question: what is the persistent problem that every book lover has? Space. Books are heavy and they take up space. The physicality of the book itself is the problem. So we love it. We get really excited when we can identify a persistent problem, because that's an invitation to go invent. Try something new that no one has done before. Now, we didn't start this whole initiative with a group of scientists sitting in a lab, playing around with e-ink, going, ooh, cool, if I reverse the polarity, it turns from black to white. This is so cool, this is awesome. We started first with this fundamental understanding of the customer, the person who loves to read, and we worked backwards from there. Now, one of the reasons why I believe the Kindle was successful, where Sony's product had not been, is that Sony's product required you to be a computer user first and a reader second. You had to understand computers and file transfer protocols. You had to do some weird conversion from PDF to .mobi files and then connect the cable and then before you could even start reading. And we said, no. Our customer is the person who opens a book and starts to read. How do we make a device that is that simple to use? We made an important design decision in the first generation Kindle. We embedded a cell phone in each first generation device, and Amazon paid the bill. Customers paid for the books they bought, they paid for the device itself, but this meant they never had to connect it to a computer. They could just look up the books they wanted to. 30 seconds later, they're reading the book. Now, from a technology perspective, that is a lot of cost and complexity to take on. What's crazy to me is we launched the Kindle in 2007. We are still today paying cell phone bills for first-generation Kindle users. Now, clearly, the cost of data has come down significantly, so it's probably not a really big line item for us. But why do we continue to take that on? Well, our position is this. That might be cost and effort up front for us. But if it's solving that persistent customer problem, they're going to come back again and again and again. Now, Kindle, fantastic success story for us. We've had other products that maybe haven't done as well. You might recall we launched a cell phone about around 2015. It was the Amazon Fire Phone. Great little phone. I had one. I really liked it. We ended up having to write off $170 million worth of unsold hardware. That's how many handsets we made that we did not sell. Big, big failure from a business perspective. Now, Jeff Bezos actually reflected on that loss in his 2018 letter to shareholders, but he comes to an interesting conclusion. From his perspective, we have an obligation to society to take bigger and bigger bets. Part of our responsibility and obligation, because large organizations are capable of doing things that could not otherwise be accomplished. And so if we really want to continue to move the needle for our customers, we have to take bigger and bigger bets. Now, he gets a little eye-opening. He actually says, I think Amazon will be inventing at about the right level when we occasionally have a multi-billion-dollar failure. What? But his perspective is this. If you're playing baseball, the maximum yield you get off of a single hit is 4 runs. So in that environment, you're going to play conservative. But in business, every once in a while, when you step up to the plate, you can knock in 1,000 runs from a single hit. And so in that environment, it makes sense for us to continue to experiment, to continue to try new things. Now, one thing that doesn't often get covered in the story of the Fire Phone was we weren't just trying to launch a cell phone. There were lots of great cell phones on the market. What we were trying to do was help evolve the human-computer interface. The Fire Phone had 4 forward-facing infrared cameras that allowed for very sophisticated gesture-based interaction with the phone, meaning that I could look at my email and I could actually flick through my email by moving my head rather than actually touching the screen. Like, it was pretty cool. But clearly it didn't do well, didn't sell well with customers. That's our final indicator of whether a product is successful or not, is does it actually get used? But when it failed, there were no mass layoffs. There was no head of product design that was let go for having had a bad idea that didn't work. We learned a ton from building this device. And we took that learning, that knowledge, that passion, a lot of the technical talent, and we used it to launch Amazon Echo, which I would argue has fundamentally shifted the human-computer interface. So how do we build that environment where we can take that kind of risk, where we can try something as big as the Fire Phone and have it flop and then get back up and try something new? Well, one of the approaches that we take is something we like to call working backwards. I've already used this phrase multiple times. We want to start with a clear idea of the customer problem. But for us, this is actually a rigorous process we use before we start investing in a new idea. before we've written a line of code, before we've done anything. We start this process, and the process actually begins when we start with the customer and a clear understanding of who they are and that persistent problem that they face. And what we do is we imagine a world 1 to 2 years in the future where this problem has now been solved. What would it look like? So you can think about your constituents. What's one of the persistent problems that, if you could imagine it away, what would that look like for them? So it usually starts out, it reads like a regular press release. It's an imaginative document where we don't release these publicly. It's an internal document. But in the first paragraph, I'm going to say, this is what the world used to look like before the solution existed. And then I'm going to have a quote from a customer that just used the thing. And it has to sound like a real human being would actually utter these words. That quote's really hard to get right. And then I might have a paragraph or two that talk about what the product does that makes life better for the customer, not how. Because technology is irrelevant at this point. What matters is the behavioral change in the customer's life that makes their life better as a result of this new thing. And then we might have a couple pages, or a couple paragraphs, excuse me, that we then say, why would Amazon get involved in this business? And as I'm working on my press release, I'm going to start to collect a bunch of questions, because people are going to have questions. Some of those questions might be from a customer that is thinking about using it. Why would I use this versus some other solution that's out there? What's better about this? And then we also have questions in the FAQ that are from internal stakeholders. What would an internal stakeholder have to say about this? What are the questions they would have? And by the way, if there's that very uncomfortable question you really hope nobody asks you about your big idea, you stick it front and center in the FAQ. We may not have an answer to that question yet, but we know we're going to have to answer it before we go build. So we limit the press release to a single page, and then that FAQ, maybe 2 to 5 pages long, we don't actually put a hard limit on there because we're using that FAQ list to pressure test the idea and the vision that's captured in page 1. And then the third component of this press release process is usually some kind of a visualization of the user experience. What does it look like for somebody to actually use this tool? So these are the 3 components in something we call working backwards. The way it works is like this. We're organized into very small, highly autonomous teams that are tightly connected to the customer. So as we're working with you, as we work with our customers and our partners, we realize maybe there's a gap. So maybe I'm an engineer, maybe I'm working on Glacier, which is kind of long-term data storage, okay? And you and I are having a conversation, and I start to realize that you have a need that my software does not provide. But I start to get excited because I'm already starting to think about what I could put together to solve that problem. And so I get really excited, and I'm going to go to my boss. I'm say, hey, boss, I got this great idea. We were just talking to the customer. Here's this thing I think we could go build. And my boss is going to go, that sounds really interesting. Go write the press release. And I'll go, yeah, and I'll run back to my laptop, and I'll start to type, and I promise you at that point, my idea is going to fall apart completely. Because at that point, I have tremendous enthusiasm for the idea, but I haven't thought it through clearly enough to articulate on a single piece of paper why in the world a customer would actually want this thing. So it forces me to slow down. It forces me to think clearly. And I'm going to be working on this, and then I'm going to share it with a few colleagues, and they're going to ask me even more uncomfortable questions that I hadn't thought of, and I add those into the FAQs. Eventually, I might get this to a place where we've iterated on it enough as a team, we can just go build. We have clarity on the persistent problem. We have clarity on the solution we're going to build. More often than not, though, the idea is bigger than us. It's bigger than me and my team. And that's where I'm going to go bring in a couple of other teams. And I might bring in some senior leaders into the room. And what do? We get together in the room and we hand out these documents and we get out our red pens and we destroy it. But there's something really remarkable that happens during this process. When I walked in the room, whose idea was it? If I had just gone and built it at that point and it had failed, whose responsibility is that? The minute that other people pick up the pen, the idea itself is transforming. We do not use this process to gain approval. for new ideas. We use this process to test the quality of our thinking and make sure as much as possible that what we're building is solving a real customer problem. So we're going to take all this feedback and then we're going to iterate on it, and we'll do it again and we'll do it again and do it again. When we finally feel like we have clarity, then we invest. This is a great low-cost way to identify bad ideas because most often we catch them while they're still on paper before we've added any funding. So all we've done is spent time in paper, and it's easier for us to walk away from it. Every product that AWS has built started out as a press release. AWS as a business started out as a press release that went through something like 54 iterations before we funded the team. There's a ton of rigor put on this process. But what it does is it produces that enduring, lasting vision that we can then iterate towards. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning, I don't pretend that our culture is the right culture for every organization. And so some of the things that we do, like this working backwards process. However, this has been one process we've seen fantastic results from when working with customers and partners to say, how do we drive change and innovation forward? This is the process that we use in our cloud innovation centers. This has been a really great public-private partnership that we've done. We often are partnering with a local university, and what we do is we actually bring in. So for example, I was in Phoenix a couple months ago, working with some state of Arizona government agencies. And what they've done before is they've brought their problems in to the Cloud Innovation Center and figure out, okay, we've gotten all of this funds in for COVID relief, for low-income folks, but we have no idea how to get the money to them. Here's the problem that we want to go solve. And so then in a partnership with our partners and with engineering students from the University of Arizona, we were actually able to put together a solution that is running today to help them solve some of their challenges. So this process really helps us free up the imagination to think bigger. And it's centered, once again, in these two fundamental questions, which I think are important for anyone in this room to think about and challenge themselves with. Who is your customer? And how are you making life better for them? Thanks very much. Wasn't sure if we had time for Q&A or, yeah.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes until we release you for a 15-minute break. So Stephen's happy to entertain any questions that you may have that you'd like to ask.
Let's see a question here.
So, use the word uncomfortable.
Yes.
Is there any tools that you have to make people not feel uncomfortable when they're in that setting?
I used the word uncomfortable, so the question is, do we have tools that make it so that people don't feel uncomfortable in that session, in that setting? We actually do think that the fact that the ideas are presented in a document is a really powerful way to level the playing field so that people don't feel uncomfortable. They're not having to stand up on a stage in front of a slide deck. The focus is then not on the individual who brought the idea forward, it's on the idea itself. That increases the level of comfort because I don't have to be a great presenter in order for my ideas to be considered. And then the other piece of it is when we critique, we're not critiquing the individual. Our critique is on the idea, and our goal is how do we make this idea even better? So that's one of the approaches we take. The other part of uncomfortable is you may ask me a question that I wish you hadn't asked me. And we have to be willing to entertain that question because it's a real question. You have a valid perspective to bring to the table. So that is also part of our culture. One of our leadership principles is called have backbone, disagree, and commit. We want to foster a culture where the person who has that different perspective is not only told to speak up, but the expectation is that they will. We say you are obligated to speak up if you have a different perspective. Why? Not because we like contention and argument, but because the only way to get to a better answer than what I already have is if someone else has a perspective that's different than mine, and I'm willing to consider the possibility that I might be wrong.
So sorry, just one follow-up question.
Follow-up, sure.
Coaches, if you was in New York and doing a session, you might have a certain group of people that might be behaving or have backbone or not spoken maybe go to Japan,
Yeah.
have different culture.
So the question and the comment here is culture is different in different parts of the world. And so the way that we maybe have this have backbone, disagree, and commit, we have to be conscious of the fact that we need to operate in a global context and to make it comfortable so that people can bring their questions forward. Now, it's going to look different from one culture to another. Good friends down in Sydney, in Australia, and they love the first half of have backbone, disagree, and commit. They love the disagree. They're like, we're gonna argue this point, and they'll hammer the table, and they'll very loud, whatever. And sometimes I've had that criticism when we're looking at, for example, when we do our promotion documents, we always have a section in our promotion documents called Best Reasons Not to Promote. And we make people fill that out. Like, we recognize there is organizational risk if we put this person forward and elevate them in promotion. And so I've been in one of those discussions where somebody said, well, this person really doesn't have a backbone, right? They never speak up in meetings. And I'm going to say, stop. Go read the leadership principle. It doesn't say anything in there about speaking up in meetings. It says bringing our concerns forward, to disagree. So what is the culturally appropriate way to disagree? And you mentioned in Japan, it's going to be different. I grew up in Mexico, and the way we disagree in Mexico is very different than the way that we would disagree in North America. And we have to be conscious of that, but that doesn't absolve me of the need to bring my perspective forward. It needs to be done in the culturally appropriate way.
You make an excellent point about Hawaii. You don't speak up.
So the Hawaiian culture, and I'm not going to presume, but the thought process is here, if you disagree, you don't really speak up, you kind of go along. And that's very much, I would say, the Latin American culture that I grew up in is much more about consensus than accuracy. So that's actually one of our leadership principles. It's uncomfortable. We say we don't compromise for the sake of social cohesion. Again, it's not about being argumentative, but it's how do we make sure that we have the necessary information to make the best decision. And the risk we run if we're all trying to get along is that somebody has a key piece of information we will miss, and we will make the wrong decision if we don't make it possible for people to speak up. For us, it's been that clear articulation of that mental model and then trying to make sure that all of our processes reinforce that. So that we don't just have a writing on the wall that says, please speak up if you have a problem, but that we culturally actually live it. And that's a challenge for all of us, for sure. Yeah, yes, sir.
What about the power dynamics factor? Like,
yes.
Me as the leader of the company,
Yeah.
forward an idea,
Yeah.
that idea, and people may not feel comfortable challenging me personally.
Yes.
I mean, even though it's on paper, it's the fact that they know who came up
Sure.
with it. So how do you address that?
Yeah, the question is, how do you address power dynamics? Because, I remember at one point in time in my career, I was hearing about things third hand, right? And I would say, why aren't people coming to talk to me about it? Like, I think I'm an approachable person, and the phrase the person used, they said, you have VP dust on you. What are you talking about? Well, you report into a VP. So they're assuming something about your approachability just because of the power dynamic that's at play. So again, this is a place where we have to build a culture where our leaders recognize the VP dust that's on them and find ways to pull back, to give space. One of the practices we often see is we would recommend, and this is in any meeting, that the senior leader actually speaks last. The question goes in front, everybody looks and debates, and then the leader speaks last. Now, there's one approach to here that would be, this is good management technique. I'm going to wait till everybody else talks. I already know what I'm going to say. I'm just going to wait for them to finish talking. And then when they're done, then I will say, and we'll be done. It's good. A good leader is the one that is listening to each one of those comments. And every time, we have one of our leadership principles, again, is our right a lot, which first sounds kind of arrogant. Why would I like that culture? But our last sentence of our right a lot is they seek diverse perspectives and work to disconfirm their belief. So our leaders will often, all of a sudden, start arguing the opposite side of the argument that they were proposing. If everyone else is nodding their heads and going along, because they're not interested in consensus, they're interested in getting to the best answer possible. So there's lots of approaches that we take, but that has to be something we're conscious of and that we exercise. Yeah. Yes, question in the front.
What you're talking about is, I lived in New York for 22 years.
Uh-huh.
I'm from California, and I lived in Hawaii for 15 years.
Yeah.
The culture is different.
Yes.
It's not like Amazon. It's
Sure.
not like Apple.
Yeah.
It's not like New York.
Well, and so the culture is different. And culture in New York, culture in Los Angeles, culture in Hawaii, I'm sure everyone has a different culture. And that's why I didn't start out saying everybody should become like Amazon and your problems are solved. I think instead, if there's a takeaway, I would suggest it's you have a culture. Have you written down your assumptions? Have you made it clear? And I think that's where our culture benefits from, is we've taken the time to really capture when we face tension between this and this, how do we think about it? Let's think about it and then let's write it down. And then people aren't operating under assumptions. You as a leader may say, I actually expect my people to argue with me. But if I've not made that clear, and if I'm not actually equipping my people to do that, they're not going to. They're going to operate under their own set of assumptions. So part of it for us is being clear and articulating what our mental models are, and then ensuring that even our people processes are actually reinforcing the culture we want to have. There's a lot of depth and complexity. These are hard problems. I'm definitely standing up here not saying Amazon has all the solutions, because we don't. We're made of humans, and humans are messy. But one of the things we love about working with our customers and working with our partners like Data House are the interactions that we get that make us better. Because we spend time, we're open to how other people are doing things, and we can learn from each other.
I think the great thing about Amazon is you teach us. You press the button, the thing comes. Whoa, how did you do that? So
Thank you. I appreciate it. She's like, she loves that Amazon, we kind of teach or inspire by you click the button and it just shows up. And you know that behind that there is so much careful thought. But I think we just had an amazing explanation and example of what's actually possible when people are working backwards from the customer problem. You have people that wanted to travel to American Samoa. That's a real use case, whether they lived there or they were trying to visit. And when you work backwards from their problem and you have clarity on that, then you build the right experience. You build the right approach. There's all kinds of machinery that has to work in the background to do that, to make that happen. But our focus is, don't get focused and lost on the details. Your focus is, how are you solving problems for your customer? Who is your customer? And how are you making life better for them? I want to thank you very much again for the opportunity to come and spend time with you. I hope that the rest of the day is one that it continues to inspire you and challenge you. If you have follow-on questions for us, first of all, everybody in a yellow shirt has chosen to identify themselves as someone from Amazon or AWS. So go pepper them with all kinds of questions. Ask them if what I talked about was actually real, what their experiences are with the organization. And we're here to share and also here to learn from you. So thank you again very much.
Mahalo, Stephen.